If you've purchased the automatic system, you'll need to install both the automated mechanism and the dust control blower onto the main housing. To install the dust control blower, first remove the retaining nut and notice that it's marked for the side that goes against the housing towards the blower. Now there's not enough room to spin the nut in the housing, so you need to rotate the blower assembly into the nut. It'll get tight in a vertical position. Then you can install the support bracket. The filter slides up into the fitting and is held in place with these two thumb screws. The cord is plugged into the outlet nearest the blower, which is a switched power supply. To install the automated mechanism onto the main housing, you're going to be lining up the 4 mounting brackets to the 4 holes in the housing. First of all, pull the capacitor out of the spring clip so you can access this bracket. Then set the mechanism onto the machine and line up the 4 holes. We'll be putting the bolts from the outside in. And the nuts on the inside. The nuts use a 10mm socket and wrench. Lightly snug them up. And make sure that the framework is perpendicular before you do the final torque on them. You can use a little Loctite on the nuts to keep them from vibrating loose. Then put the capacitor back into the spring clip. The stroking motor gets plugged into the 3rd outlet, which is switched with the camshaft. The 4th outlet is non-switched, which we'll discuss later in the instructions. The next items to install will be the camshaft lever, the magnetic heads, and the drive pin. We'll start with the lever for the camshaft. Simply thread it into the collar on the end, tighten it securely. Take the comb blade magnetic head assembly and put it in the socket right like that. Have the camshaft lever up to rest it on. Take the cutter blade head assembly, put it in this socket over here, and with the Allen wrench provided, we're going to tighten these set screws so that the heads are perpendicular. You can sight down this side and line it up with the edge of the boss as a reference and tighten the Allen securely. So with the head securely fastened and the counter pin that has the red O-ring on it in a vertical position, we'll rotate the machine with the camshaft up and lift the cover lid so that we can put the drive pin into the stroking motor lever. Lift the drive bar, put the pin in the hole that is furthest away from the motor shaft for the A5 blades and closest for the large animal blades. Secure the pin with the Allen. And firmly push the drive bar down so that it's fully bottom in the groove. Shut the lid and make sure that the safety switch is contacted with the tab and you can audibly hear it click so that the mechanism will activate. Between the blower and the mechanism, if you have the automatic, and you pull the collar back, put it down onto the post, and pull the collar down to lock it into place so it won't come off, but it will still swivel. Plugs into this outlet right here, which when the machine is plugged into the wall has power all the time, so the light can be turned on and off at will. To install the disc, you'll be lining up the hold down screw hole in the disc with the threaded hole in the drive plate. Make sure that the pin in the center and the reference ring surface are both clean and free of any grit particles. Wipe out the center hole in the disc and also the reference ring on the underside of the plate. Line up the hole with the threaded hole and slide it down over the motor shaft. Install the drive hold down screw and tighten securely. Before you tighten it completely, you want to push the disc towards, with the screw towards you, push the disc away from you to take up any minute amount of play in the center. That's how all the machining and balancing operations are done, and we want to duplicate that when we install it on the machine. At this point, you can draw the guide wire across and attach it to the post. It has two posts for the different size blades. You'll be using this post all the way up through the number 4 blades, and all the taller blades you can put it on this post so that you have more clearance when you're doing the blades. Once the mechanism is fully installed, we'll run it through some paces to make sure everything works on it properly. The stroking motor won't have power unless the main power switch is in the up and on position. There is a 4th outlet that you can plug the stroking motor into that is non-switched, so that you can activate the mechanism without the disc spinning. Or for when you're doing the small trimmer blades, you want to use the momentary position of the power switch to bump the disc and maintain a slower RPM. You would want the stroking to continue even though the main motor doesn't have power, so that's when you would use the 4th outlet. Right now we're in the 3rd. And so I'm going to turn the main switch on to turn the main motor on. And at this point, with the disc on a clean drive plate and the reference ring clean and the screw tight, you shouldn't hear any vibration. The disc should feel smooth with no wobble to it. If you do have wobble or a noise or vibration noise, then stop it with the brake, and double check that you're down fully and everything is clean. The counting mechanism is what you're going to set to determine the number of strokes that the blades are ground for each cycle. Now the red O-ring represents the full cycle, which is 6.5 strokes, about 23 seconds of grinding time. And that will typically take at least 1,000–1,500 off of your standard A5 blade. So we use that as a starting point, and then if the blade needs more taken off of it to get fully sharp, then we run it for more length of time. We're going to run it back and forth with the arms in a vertical position just to test the mechanism to begin with. Normally you would load a blade, put it down on the camshaft, and begin grinding. So as I lowered the camshaft, it's going to trigger the micro switch on the end of the shaft and start the stroking action. You can see each rotation it clicks one peg, and when it gets to the end of the cycle, it's going to rotate this camshaft, turn the stroking motor off, and pick the arms up off the plate. So that's the way it should be functioning at this point. You fully raise the camshaft lever to reset for the next cycle. Now if you just wanted to do a couple strokes, you could start at that point, for instance, to take a little bit more off of perhaps the cutter didn't quite get fully sharp or what have you. If you want to grind continuously, for instance on a large animal blade where you want to grind for 40 seconds or a minute, you can disengage the stop lever and the stroking will run indefinitely. You can stop and start it wherever you like at any point just by picking up the camshaft. The stroking motor can also be plugged into the fourth outlet. This gives power to the mechanism at all times. This allows the mechanism to be activated even when the main power switch is off, so that you can bump the motor and control the disc speed for a slower grinding rate, which is advantageous on small trimmer blades. If you need to stop the disc, you'll employ the brake simply by pushing on the black knob so it contacts the edge of the disc and slows it down. Travel clamps fasten securely onto the shafts. And can be left on if you were running just one arm or the other and you didn't want the other one to accidentally fall. The arms will traverse with the clamps in place. The magnetic blade holders feature a couple different adjustments that you'll need to make as the machine gets some wear on it and they loosen up. What you're wanting to do is maintain free articulation on the pivots without any noticeable play or slop in this direction. And they'll come set like we like to run them, but after you run the machine for 100 blades, 200 blade sets, just check it when it's up in the air and just see if it's worked loose. And if so, you're going to use the small Allen and a flat bladed screwdriver. Now you're not normally going to be moving the lower one. The lower pivot pin is an eccentric, and by turning that we can dial in the magnet pack perfectly square to the head, which is very important, especially on the cutter magnet, since it keys into the spring groove and determines how square to center line the blade is. So if your cutter blades ever get crooked looking, or crooked in relation to center line, you would adjust the lower pivot. Or if you change out the pivots in the future when they get worn out, you're going to set the magnet square with the lower one, and I'll show you. You loosen the set Allen on the side and turn the pivot, and you're going to watch that this is going to come in and out of square. If you get play developed in the pivots, you'll just adjust the play out with the upper pivot screw. Loosen the Allen and turn the screw in to tighten it up, and out if you get it too tight. So this has a lot of play in it. I'm just going to start turning it in until I get rid of the play, but I'm still articulating freely. Then snug up the Allen. Now, it doesn't have to be real tight, but we want it snug so that that pivot can't rotate. On the cutter magnet, you would do the same thing, and also if the blade gets out of parallel, or if you change the pivot screws in the future, you're going to need to adjust the lower pivot, which has the eccentric, to set how square the magnet is. So with the Allens loose, when I rotate this lower one, you'll see that it comes in and out of square. And so you determine square by looking straight on. With the blade mounted, it gives you a reference. And you're trying to make that square to the head so that when it's down on the plate, it's parallel with the center line. If you need to turn the screw clockwise to get it square, you may have to back off the upper screw to give you room, and so you'll kind of jockey back and forth in the name of getting it square and setting the tension right. So I'm going to set that right there. Looks good and square. And then if you had been using the machine for a while and developed some play in it, then you would take the play out, but have it still rotate freely. Snug up the Allens. And you're ready to go. The other adjustment on the head is the height adjustment. By loosening these two Allens, we can change the length of the head to maintain parallel to the plate so that the tail magnet bracket doesn't grind itself on the plate by being out of parallel. We want to maintain clearance between the tail bracket and the plate.
To adjust the height of the head, loosen just the lower Allen set screws so that you can spread the head to the required height.
As the disc is remachined, it's going to get thinner, and the head will have to reach down lower to reach it, and that will change the angle of the tail magnet bracket in relation to the disc. So you always want to be sure, even on the thinnest blade you're sharpening, that you always have clearance between the plate and the tail magnet bracket so that you don't grind on the tail magnet bracket. If your contact there, the head will not be able to articulate and you will not get the proper grind on the blade. Both the magnetic heads can be adjusted in relation to center line. The shafts have a machined groove in them, which is where they are normally be set for your A5 blades. Slide the head right up to where you can still see the line and tighten down the knob. It tightens onto a flat that is milled in the shaft, so it will keep the head perpendicular. What we're trying to maintain is the center of the blade in line with the center of the wheel, so that the hollow grind is centered in the blade. You can determine, no matter what blade, determine where it should be on the plate by holding it over the motor shaft, locating center of the blade in relation to where the cutter rides on it, and noticing the distance from the guide wire that the tips of the teeth are. When in turn it is mounted on the head and lowered to the plate,
and see that the same distance from the tips of the teeth to the string line is maintained.
the guide wire has two posts that it can be connected to. The first post is for all the blades that do not have real long teeth on the comb blades, and you're going to reference to center line to determine how far away from the string you should be. And then you're going to duplicate that distance when you're down on the plate sharpening. With a large blade such as this tall 3/4, where you would be running into the guide wire if it was on the first post, you move to the second post, take your reading, and that's where you're going to be as your hand sharpening. If you're using the automatic machine, you don't need the guide wire for guidance, but you can move it over there so it's not contacted from the blades and possibly knocking the taller blades off. To install the lid, simply slide the edge underneath the framework. Might have to slightly push it down in the center and bottom it out. Make sure the armrest saddle is settled in, and push down the hold down clamp. To remove, you pick up this end and pull out. Cleaning and recharging the plate is one of the most important steps in the resharpening process. We'll start by cleaning the disc off of an expired charge with the cleaning tool. I have a shop towel on there, and I'm going to wet the towel with water very liberally by rolling it on a sponge that is pretty wet. You can have it in a tray like this and flip it over and keep water on it so that when you roll the towel, water visibly comes out and it gets it fully saturated. Now with the disc running about half speed, that's full speed. I'm going to turn it off, and you can turn it off as it's coasting down. Wet your towel. If it's going too fast, slow it down a little bit with the brake. And I'm going to contact the plate, the heel of the tool, being careful not to roll back too far to where I would contact this with the plate, this bracket. And then the minute I touch, I'm going to start rotating the tool. I've waited a little long and the towel is expanded, so I'm going to just take some of the slack out of it. I'm slightly moving side to side to get full contact, and you can see how it's picked up all the debris off the plate. And I'm going to dispose of this towel by putting my thumb on the thumb knob and pulling up on the spring-loaded clamp to release the towel. Take it off and dispose of it. I'm going to take another section of towel, put it on the tool, and this time I'm going to wet it with denatured alcohol. Not quite as liberally as with the water. As the disc is still slowly spinning, I'm going to do a final clean on the disc, finishing with the dry portion of the towel, and the alcohol will also evaporate very rapidly, so we have a nice clean dry disc surface. As you can see, it picked up whatever I missed with the water. Now I'm going to leave this towel on the cleaning tool and use it for the initial cleaning next sequence with the water. So you wipe the wheel twice, but you only use one towel each time. The lapping solution, you're going to use 1 milliliter onto the disc surface as it's slowly spinning. As you see, it's coming down from speed. I'm going to fill the eyedropper up to 1 milliliter and slowly dispense it on the surface as the disc is slowly spinning there, leaving a spiral trail. With the applicator, I'm going to smear the solution evenly over the surface, and if the disc slows down too much, I'm going to just bump the motor and be sure I'm smearing it completely so that I have a nice uniform cover on the disc.
Next, use the grit spreader to dispense approximately 1/8 of a teaspoon of grit onto the disc surface. Do this by holding it level, yet tilted back so you get as light of a stream of grit coming off all the way across the spreader pan. Stop the disc and see that you've achieved approximately 50% coverage without any piles, clumps, or any bare spots. If the disc speed is too fast, the grit will get blown and not be able to land on it, and if the disc speed is too slow, you may see some lines or piles from the pulsation of the spreader. Once the grit is dispensed on the disc surface, you'll take the cork block and with light pressure in a circular motion go around the wheel to level any high piles or bare areas and to marry the grit to the surface of the disc with the lapping solution. Next, with a used comb blade, have its heel raised up slightly, go over back a couple times to set the grit into the disc surface. Once the grit has been set with the blade, you should see even dispersion of it. Enough dark spottiness to it to represent enough solution has been applied. And there's no big dark clumps or any bare areas. With the lid off the machine, we'll go through the complete process once more. Cleaning the old debris with the water. Replacing the towel with a new towel. Wetting it with alcohol to remove the remaining debris and to thoroughly dry the disc surface. We'll leave that towel on the cleaning tool for use next go around. 1 milliliter of lapping solution. Anytime the disc slows down, you can just bump it with the momentary switch. Smear the lapping solution evenly and with a little force, make sure it is rubbed into the surface thoroughly. Dispensing the grit. Stop the wheel. Rub it in with the cork block. If the cork block collects lapping solution and old grit from the previous time, brush it off with the brass brush and then setting the grit. At this point, you're ready to sharpen. So I'll start with the 40 blade. For everything up through the number 4 blade, you'll be in hole number 1. The bottom of the tail magnet bracket is stamped 1 and 2. So you'll be in the upper hole for most of the blades that you'll be doing. All the large animal blades, when you put the large animal blade magnet on there, will go through hole number 1, 2. The only time you'll be in hole number 2 is for anything taller than a number 4, a 3 3/4, 5/8 tall, 3/4 tall, those types of blades. To put the cutter blades onto the magnet, put the 2 tips of the magnet into the spring groove. At this point, we want to position the blade in this direction so that when we go down to the plate, the heel of the blade touches first
not the tips. If the tips touch first, you'll grind the tips off, and you'll have to grind an excessive amount of material off the blade to correct the error. So you can reference to this plane right here. That kind of represents the level of the plate down below. And so always have the tips of the blade towards it so that you're sure that the heel touches first. Now the closer to a perfect set down you can make, the better it is. And what you can do in the beginning, and I'm going to have the lid off the machine so we can see this a little better, is with the machine off, do a initial set down to see how the blade contacts the plate. And you always want the heel to touch slightly first. This, if you have it real excessive, it's liable to catch and tear the blade off and damage the wheel. If you have it to where the tips touch first, then it's going to grind the tips. So you're shooting for just a nice, gentle settling of the blade, heel slightly first, and then the tips coming down. And that applies to all the blades, both the comb and the cutter. You always want to meet up to the plate in that manner. When mounting the comb blades, I'll start with a 40 blade. You're going to be keying in the two ears or lugs on the tail magnet into the two screw holes on the blade. The best way to do that is with your left hand, have the pin all the way to the bottom of the slot, and then swing the magnet out, tail magnet out, and key into the screw holes so that you're away from the main magnet so it's not affecting you. When you pull down, it'll square up the blade and swing the whole assembly towards the main magnet, maintaining that interference angle so that when we go down to the plate, the heel will touch first and not the tips. So as we go down, we'll see it settle onto the plate, heel first, and then come down to the tips. Now, if you do an initial set down, such as that, with the plate off, and then pick it up, it'll stay settled and do a very nice entry into your new charge. Number 10 is going to be the same as the 40. The taller blades, such as this 3/4 tall, requires that you go to hole number 2. Pull the rubber cap off, pull the pin out, slide it down to hole number 2. Swing the magnet out, key in. Now these are a little deceiving. You have to reference to this angle right here, and you have to kick it out quite a bit so that we end up hitting the plate with the heel first. We'll do initial set down to see how we did. So it hits the heel first and then settles the tips down. Now when you're doing these large blades, you're going to want to remove the string line. The string line is not necessary with the automatic unless you want it there just as a reference to make sure things are in the proper place. On the large blades, it will catch the string. To sharpen the large animal blades, such as the Stewart 8384AU, we will need to install the large blade comb magnet. Pull the pin out of the small blade magnet, and you'll notice on the large blade magnet there is a flush side and a side that has 2 ears on it. For the Stewarts, we are going to use the flush side. Put it so that the pin goes through hole number 1. And with the comb, we're going to be lining up the back edge of the blade to this magnet bar. Center it. push the pin to the bottom of the slot and then swing towards the main magnet. Now at this point we need to be sure that the pin can slide in that slot, because the blade can't articulate on the magnet because it's held solid. So the articulation has to be taking place in this slot. So if it's a little tight, you can push up on it a little bit so it moves freely like such. When it goes down onto the plate, when we get horizontal, you'll see that it drops down, automatically making the heel hook first like we want. And when we go down with the camshaft, it articulates and settles into the plate. So this can't get bound up with grit and debris in that slot and restrict that movement. The cutter has an oval opening in the center of it. The two pins of the magnet will poke through into it, and you position it so that the heel touches first. We'll go on down to the plate and let it settle into the surface of the disc. The Lister comb uses the side of the magnet that has the two ears on it. So you turn it over, still in hole number 1. These two holes are what the lugs will go through. Swing towards the main magnet and make sure that it moves freely, like with the Stewart. The cutter goes on the cutter magnet, has an oval opening also, but it also has this drive boss. The magnet is clearance to clear that, so simply go on as the Stewart, position it for a good set down,